How much money do you make? It's kind of a personal question, isn't it? Almost rude. But the truth is, the ultimate sign of a healthy business is not revenue, it's not valuation, or even customer satisfaction. The ultimate sign of a healthy business is its ability to distribute large chunks of cash to stakeholders, and that includes you. So how much you make matters. But the fact is, most entrepreneurs make two big mistakes. We either leave too much cash in the business and we personally starve to death, or we take out too much cash and the company winds up starving for growth capital. Well, in this video, I'm gonna show you how to install a cash flow waterfall in your business that maximizes your personal distributions while still leaving enough cash in the business for growth. I'll tell you how much you should leave in savings, how much you should leave in operations, the different bank accounts that you'll need, and I'll even drop a link to the same tool that my clients and portfolio companies use to manage their own company's cash flow. So be sure to check that out in the description. Now, if you don't know who I am, my name is Ryan Deiss. My partners and I manage 17 businesses across our $200 million holding company. So we know a thing or two about cash flow management. Now, before we get into the tool itself, exactly how much to leave in the business, how much you should be taking out, I wanna go over a couple of core principles that really are gonna drive this entire process. So core principle number one is you need to act broke. In other words, we don't wanna build up too much surplus in your business checking account. If you do that, you're just gonna wind up spending it on stuff that you don't need. And the reason for that is this concept known as Parkinson's Law. Now, Parkinson's Law states that work will expand to fill the time available for its completion. You probably have experienced this before, right? If you give yourself 2 weeks to complete a project, well, guess what? It's gonna take 2 weeks. The same project, if you give yourself a week, it'll probably take about a week. While that is true about projects, it's also true for expenses, because the reality is that an optimistic entrepreneur's ability to spend will always outpace their ability to earn. And you probably have experienced this, I know I have. When there's a lot of money in the bank, I can always find people to hire, I can always find expensive software to buy, I can always find, probably unnecessary perks to offer to the team, which is why it's important that we bake in profitability ahead of time. We'll talk more about that. Core principle number two is you need to plan for rain. And by rain, I mean emergencies. We need some kind of emergency fund. And emergencies, this isn't just being negative, right? It's not being kind of a negative Nelly if you plan for the emergency to happen. The reality is that emergencies are an everyday occurrence for entrepreneurial companies. I mean, stuff just happens. I remember, this was a good number of years ago, but I remember we lost all of our merchant accounts because literally we had acquired a company, and this company's had offices that were based out of Pakistan. And because we had offices in Pakistan, our banks, for some reason, thought that we were literally laundering money for terrorist groups. I am not exaggerating. It is completely unfair. It did eventually get worked out, but we lost our merchant accounts and we lost a number of our bank accounts for over 30 days. Now, we were able to survive this because we had an emergency fund, but if we didn't have an emergency fund, this emergency that was literally not our fault, I promise you, we're not laundering money for terrorists, okay? Never have, never will. Certainly we're not doing it then. That was almost enough, and if we didn't have this fund, it would have brought our entire company down. And in terms of core principle number three, you need to fill the buckets. And we're gonna talk about what those buckets are, but it's really important that you tell your money where to go. So we wanna make sure that we've got funds that are in our operating account. And then once we have enough funds in our operating account, those funds should then flow into another account and then another account. The analogy that we use, if you've ever been to a wedding and you've seen one of those champagne glass pyramids, right? You've seen it where they start pouring it in the top and then it overflows one glass and it flows into the next and the next and the next. This is exactly how we want your cash flow to function. It's why we refer to it as a cash flow waterfall. So let's get into exactly how this is gonna work, some of the buckets that you're gonna be filling in your cash flow waterfall. So the very first bucket that we need to fill is your operating account. Now this operating account is probably where you're paying your expenses out of. It might be, even where your funds, whether you're receiving invoices or merchant fees, it's where everything is dropping in initially. And in general, we wanna make sure that we have at least 1 month of operating expenses in that account at all times. 1 month at all times. So what do we mean by operating expenses? Literally, we mean how much money do you need on a given month to keep all your doors open? To cover payroll, to cover rent, to cover all of your fixed expenses, even to cover some variable expenses, even what you would expect to spend on advertising and things that you could turn off but you'd rather not. As this operating account begins to fill, now we want it to overflow into some other buckets. And one bucket that it absolutely needs to overflow into is you need to have a tax savings account. So this is another bucket that we need to be siphoning money into almost as soon as it arrives. And I'll let you and your tax professional decide exactly how much of what comes in should be going into that tax savings account. But it is really, really important that above all else, you make sure that you are saving for taxes. A lot of bad things can happen in business, but there's only one entity that can rob you of your liberty, that can basically take your entire business from you, and that is the government. So we do not want to mess with them. We want to make sure that we're setting aside money for taxes. We want to make sure that as it's coming in, we're doing that. If not every week, definitely every month. Now, once we have covered the tax man and once our operating account is over 1 month operating expenses, now we want to begin to allow some money to flow into an emergency fund. And our rule is we want to have 3 to 6 months of operating expenses in this emergency fund. Now, this emergency fund is not for investment purposes. This is not for, let's say, for making a future investment or acquisition. It is, as described, it is for emergencies. In general, though, I think it can be a mistake to have more than 6 months in an emergency fund. I've met a lot of entrepreneurs who feel like they should have 12 months of cash just sitting around at all times. I've heard, Bill Gates tell stories about how he did that. Look, probably your business isn't, Microsoft. Probably you don't need to have 6 months lying, more than 6 months lying around at all times. Now, at this point, it should now overflow into the available cash fund. And available cash means this money is available for distribution or it's available for reinvestment. But the point is, we don't want it to just sit in the business. Remember, we want to act broke. Core principle number 1, we don't want it to just sit in the business. If it sits, it gets spent. So we don't want to do that. So perhaps we want to set aside some money for future acquisitions or investments. Maybe we're planning on making an acquisition. Maybe we're planning on making a significant investment in a new opportunity, a new advertising model. Maybe we know that we got a new product launch that we're going to do, and that's going to require. Maybe there's an event coming around the road. Either way, if you have a specific future investment in mind, you might set that up as an acquisition or investment fund. Let's let it flow over into that. Another thing you might create is what's known as a sinking fund. And a sinking fund is a fund that you would set up for a known future expense. So, for example, at a lot of my companies, we host annual events. These annual events could be anywhere from $250,000 to $2 million, $3 million, $4 million and up. So that's a big expense. Now, there's no question if this expense is going to be there. It is going to be there. So it makes sense that as we have available cash, that maybe we should put some of that money in what's known as a sinking fund so that we can fund those future investments. Now, in addition to that, probably one of the most important accounts that you need to be doing is your own bank account. We need to be making distribution. So when I talk about filling the buckets, this is what I mean. Now, I got a cool tool for you. It's available down in the description. I want you to have the same stuff that we use here. And this tool is called the Cashflow Waterfall Worksheet. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to plan for where your money is going to go. And that is really, really important because if you don't tell your money where to go, you're simply going to wonder where it went. So let's go through the steps of doing this. Step number 1 is we need to set up your different waterfall accounts, your different Cashflow waterfall accounts. And just so we're clear, a Cashflow waterfall, it specifies the movement of available cash from the company operating account into prioritized, specialized accounts for predetermined future use. So what we need to do is determine what are the predetermined future uses of cash that we might need, over and above rent and payroll and basic things like that. In other words, what are all of these different buckets? So some common cash flow waterfall accounts that we're going to encourage you to set up, the different bank accounts that you're going to need. Number 1, obviously you're going to need to have an operating account. This should be a checking account. Probably already have that. Nothing overly crazy here. In addition to that, you're going to need a tax account. Now, this tax account should be a savings account. It could be a money market account. It shouldn't be an investment account. Okay, this is money that you are setting aside that you intend to send to the tax man. This is going to happen at least annually, Probably you're making quarterly payments. If you're putting your payroll taxes in there, that's happening every single month. Now, in addition to that, you can have an emergency fund. I highly recommend that this emergency fund just be a normal savings account if you're getting decent savings rate. The goal of your emergency fund is not to generate a positive return on investment. It is to be there when you need it, and make no mistake, you absolutely will need it. The fourth type of account that you're gonna need are the investment accounts. What accounts should you have set up? Separate bank accounts for different sinking funds. So do you need a special event fund? Do you need a retained earnings fund? Do you wanna set up a separate account because maybe you're planning to buy a building or a special piece of equipment? But all of those should be separate accounts, and they should be earmarked. And then the last type of account, and this is one that a lot of people would forget about, is the distribution account. Now, a lot of people would say, why do I need a distribution account if I'm just gonna be sending it out anyway? You'll see why, because we're not distributing 100% of the distributable amount every single month or quarter. Again, I'll get to that in just a second, but these are the 5 different types of waterfall accounts that you need. So take notice, what are the accounts that you don't have? Go to your bank, let's get these things set up. Once that's done, you can move on to step 2, which is to build your 1-month operating expense account. Now, this one's pretty simple. Basically, you wanna make sure that you have enough in your primary business checking account to cover any and all bills that will hit that month. We don't wanna be in a place where we're showing up on the first of the month and there's basically no money in our business checking account, but we know we've got outstanding bills, so it's like, better make sure you sell something this month or you're gonna go backwards. No, we don't wanna do that. We wanna show up at the first of the month, knowing at the first of this month, we have plenty of cash in the account, so that if we literally made 0 sales, which hopefully won't happen, you still be fine. We wanna start off every month with more than enough in that account. So what is that for you, right? What is that for you? And the simplest way to do that is to just go back and look, on average, where do we land? And if you wanna be conservative, look at what have been some of the highest expense months that you've had. For us, we round it up, if it's 98,000, we'll just say, let's make it 100,000 or 200,000. We like to keep it a nice round number. And the reason we like to keep it a nice round number is because it makes it easier to know over and above how much are we moving out. So once you know this number, I want you to go over to your cash flow waterfall worksheet, and I want you to put that in the 1-month OpEx box. So in this particular example, for this particular business, they realized that on average, they're spending about $125,000 every single month in expenses. So that goes in the 1-month OpEx account. Step 3 is to determine your tax savings amount. Now, again, this is a conversation that you need to be having with your tax professional, but we found that on average, this should be at least about 30%. Like that's typically where it's gonna come in. If you're in a higher tax state or jurisdiction, maybe you need to bump it to 35, or 40%. But there is a line item there on the cash flow waterfall worksheet where you can put in what is that tax savings account. And the beautiful thing is, based on how much is in your operating account, it's gonna tell you how much you need to move into that tax savings account. So this is designed that, each month you go ahead and plot in the numbers and it says, here's where you need to move all the cash. Step 4, build a 3-month starter emergency fund. So we've already talked about that. In your emergency fund, you should have 3 to 6 months. We wanna make sure we build up to at least a 3-month, and we wanna do that as quickly as possible. Now, when we talk about 3 to 6 months, like I said, 3 months is kind of the minimum. If you're feeling a bit more conservative, you can go to 6 months. We really don't recommend, though, keeping more than 6 months of operating expense cash in your bank account, unless things are just really volatile with your business, and hopefully they're not. The reason we wanna have this emergency fund is because it's an emergency fund that keeps you from making short-term decisions. It keeps you from taking on a bad fit project or a bad fit client because you just needed the cash. And you've probably been there. I've been there as well, right? I didn't want to take on this client, but the reality is I needed the money. Now, if you need the money, that's fine. We've all been there. Again, this is a judgment-free zone, of course, but how much better would it be to still be able to tell that person no, even in a bad month, because we've got an emergency fund. Similarly, maybe you're launching something new instead of focusing on scaling what you have, or maybe you're slashing prices and you're running a sale to create quick cash today at the expense of future margins and of future brand value, or maybe you're cutting back on the customer experience. Maybe you're hoping no one notices, which by the way, they only always do. Maybe you're doing the work yourself and instead of having the funds to hire a true expert. Well, good news, if you have an emergency fund, you can. Or just not making an investment or some key hire because you just don't have the funds. This is why we need to have these emergency funds in place. So when it comes to emergency funds, again, use a savings account. This is not for investing. You should only tap it for like real live emergencies, not just nice to have. If you tap your emergency fund, refilling it is priority number one. And this is important. No distributions or other savings until your emergency fund equals 3 months of fixed operating. Okay, once you got 3 months of fixed operating in that emergency fund, not total operating, not fixed plus variable, that's what we want to have in the operating account, just your fixed stuff, just the things that you can't get out of if you wanted to. We want to have at least 3 months. Debt and lines of credit, that ain't an emergency fund. Debts and lines of credit can get cut, they can get called back. And again, I don't recommend that you necessarily borrow against your emergency fund. It really needs to be there, like the name suggests, just for emergencies. Okay, now it's time to think about funding your future investments while, if you want to, still saving for emergencies. So at this point, if you want to move beyond 3 months in that emergency account, my advice to you and my advice to all of our clients and portfolio company CEOs who feel like, I feel like we should have a bit more than 3 months, operating expenses in the emergency fund, is to go 50-50. What that means is the operating account is full. It's now going to dump into the emergency fund, but the emergency fund, you got 3 months in there. Rather than keeping all the funds in there until you get to 6 months, go 50-50, okay? And say we're going to leave 50% in the emergency fund to slowly build to 6 months or whatever your number is. The other 50% though, we want to flow over into available cash to either fund future sinking funds, acquisitions, or investments if needed, or heck, paying yourself a distribution. And if you go and look at the cash flow waterfall worksheet, you can see here we've got 2 different emergency fund levels. If you want to have emergency fund level 1, which would be that 3 month. If you want to have emergency fund level 2, again, wouldn't recommend up to 6 months, but if you want to have different levels and if you want to have a percentage offset, we've accounted for that as well. And then everything over and above that, you can build different target percentages based on how quickly you want to fill any of the other accounts that you have. So in this example, this particular business, they've got an annual event fund that they want to make sure they're saving for. They've got a building fund because they want to, move, stop leasing and actually purchase a building. They've got a company retreat fund, and they've got some additional like retained earnings that they want to set aside for possible future like unknown, investment. Now, some other examples of sinking funds or future investments would be things like, building or real estate down payments, large equipment purchases. Let's say you want to run a marketing or an advertising campaign test. I know we've done this a number of times. We heard about this other idea that worked really well, but we don't know. So rather than pulling from your existing marketing budget, maybe you say, let's have a test account. And so you want to create a test account, a separate one. Annual events, which I mentioned, a biggie. This is a big, big biggie. Holiday and end of year bonuses. Most of the entrepreneurs that I know pay some type of holiday or end of year bonus, but they forget about it until December. Look, there's no question about when the end of year is going to be. It's only always December 31st. So if you're going to pay some type of holiday bonus, Christmas bonus, end of the year bonus, don't be shocked when the end of the year or the holidays turn up at December, because it's going to happen every freaking year. Plan for it, save for it, set up a special account for it, budget into it. Another big one would be like company retreats. I know a lot of sales-driven organizations that they offer big, president, retreats for their top sales reps and things like that. Again, if you have a known expense that you're budgeting for, don't just budget for it, save for it. Create the accounts, set aside, let the money that is overflowing from the other buckets into these other funds so that when the expenses arrive, the cash is already there to pay it. The next step, we want to bank the profits. And I'm a big, big, big believer in having a separate account that is your distribution fund. You're basically saying we are putting money in this account and it is available for distribution. The plan is to distribute this amount. And what I love so much about the cash flow waterfall worksheet is it will tell you exactly how much is available to go into your distribution fund and how much are you accumulating in that particular fund. This is one of the metrics that I look at. Every single month, how much distributable cash have we produced at this company in this month? And I don't just, look at that and do that because I want to make more money, which, let's be honest, I do, and hopefully so do you. I look at it because it's the ultimate sign of a healthy business. If a business every single month doesn't have any money available for distributions, if everything's going right back into the business, then I gotta ask, why are we doing this thing? Now, there's obviously gonna be times when you're gonna double down. You're gonna wanna say, no. For right now, we're gonna be doubling down on growth. But if that's the only thing that you ever do, if the money never comes out, then I submit to you, you're not running a fully efficient and effective business, because the goal of every business is to distribute excess profits to the stakeholders. That's the ultimate goal of every business. Do not believe the hype that your job as an entrepreneur is to freaking starve to death, invest everything back in the business, because maybe one day at the end, if you sell, there's gonna be a giant pot of gold waiting at the end of the rainbow. You can have both. You can both take distributions today, and you can have the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And in my experience, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow when you sell your business is actually a lot bigger if you're able to take distributions along the way, because it means you're actually profitable. So I want you to move cash into your distribution fund, and then I actually want you to distribute it. This is really, really important. A lot of business owners will say, but what if the company needs it? What if we distribute the cash and the company needs it? It's really simple. Reinvest the funds back into the business. I love this for a couple of reasons, because if you pull the money out of the business and then you find that the business needs it, you're gonna find it's a lot harder to write a check back into the business than it would have been just to leave it there and spend the money, which is gonna cause you to question, well, why does it need it? What's going on? Could we be more efficient? Could we cut expenses? Could we increase sales? You're gonna get a lot more efficient and effective in the questions that you ask if you've got to write a check back into your business. Ask me how I know. It also is gonna ensure, if you've got partners in a business, it's gonna ensure if the cash comes out, and let's say everybody realizes, hey, we need to make an investment back into the business. Well, if some partners can and some partners can't, or some partners will and some partners won't, then that investment back in the business should change the cap table. It should change the equity structure. So what you don't want to be in is a position where the company is constantly chewing up all of the excess cash, the cap table is staying the same. You got some people who really believe in the business, some people who don't. Heck no, distribute that money out. And look, if the company needs it, then the people who believe in the business will reinvest. They will re-underwrite their investment in the business, and in doing so, they should receive additional equity if the other people don't. It really is just as simple as that. So not only does it keep the business honest, it keeps the other partners honest. I'm a big believer in distributing cash. So the way that we do it is we distribute 80% of the cash that is in the distribution account at the end of every quarter. Okay, this is how we do it. I like quarterly for a couple of reasons. It kind of evens out some of the fluxes and things like that. And the nice thing is we're gonna leave 20% in just in case. It kind of serves as that kind of just in case additional emergency fund. And then at the end of every year, we're typically gonna sweep that out as well. So if you like this, let's talk action steps. Let's talk about some things that you should do next. Number one, set up your cash flow waterfall accounts. Those 5 different types of accounts. And you may have multiple accounts within them. Also, understand what your 1 month operating expenses is, and make sure that you've got at least that much in your account every single month. Next, meet with an accountant and determine how much should you be setting aside in that savings account, and backfill that tax account if needed. Then start building that 3-month starter emergency fund and start funding some of those future investments. Futurecast those cash moves for the next 90 days so that you can get a sense of where does your money need to go instead of wondering where it went. And this is a biggie. I want you to start tracking your distributable cash. I promise you're going to become a lot more effective and a lot more efficient in running your business. You're going to ask a lot of good questions, and you're going to start, frankly, looking for ways that you can generate excess margin and excess profit, because as you start to see it build up in that distributable cash fund, and as you and your partner start to take distributions, you're just going to build a better business. You just really are. Again, down in the description, I linked up to the tool that we use to make this planning process a lot easier. So check that out. There's an additional video walkthrough that shows you how to use that as well. So scroll down, get that. Thanks so much for watching, and hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video.